not wait anymore for people, they will join later. Some of them left, but so we will coming back to real world of business decision management. And Tom represents one of newest but very active vendor in the area of DMN and BPM. So, and Tom will talk about real world cases.
Okay. Thank you, Jacob. So today, today I want to just bring some battle experiences from the field. We have a lot of expertise here, so I don't really have to delve into a lot of beginner stuff here. But I want to bring some, again, as I said, the battle experiences of working with, in particular, Dodd-Frank regulations, and this perplexing problem of how do we map Dodd-Frank requirements as stated by the Code of Federal Regulations. We're going to talk about Part 43, which is reporting the swap reporting requirement and the organizational reporting requirement. So I'm just starting out with some starting definitions, and then we'll get into why I'm talking about this. Right there have been people who have actually researched the problem of how do I categorize and organize regulations, right? And Signavio doesn't have a solution for this that's connected to DMN, but this is what our customers are asking us. By ours, everyone here is, assuming you're selling DMN and this type of regulatory compliant to people, are asking us to map their regulations to DMN structures. So these regulations could include something like this. Oh, where's my? So I can't get it all the way over there. So anyway, all right. So these type of regulations with this type of language, and I don't know how many of us have actually gone in and read the code of CFRs, right? But I have worked with a few customers on trying to solve these problems, particularly in Dodd-Frank, right? So there are, as I said, and I have some of the good papers on it. We do have some people working on this problem, working on mapping regulations, just organizing them into a certain taxonomy, right? And then placing that organization in some type of reproducible tree. And it's very difficult. You would think you could just, make up a little tree structure, and this is Dodd-Frank Part 43, but the people who are doing this are using high confidence or high availability, high confidence software techniques to try and solve the problem. So to get this one line in a decision table to properly point back up to the regulations like what I just showed, no one does it. I guarantee you right now, no one's doing it. We're trying to. Our customers want us, our big banks want us to do that. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that beyond the issue of the business decision. The business decision, regulations are not organized into business decisions. Regulations set up this framework of normative behavior, as the previous slide said, that has certain restrictions and constraints that need to be enforced. So we're taking this idea of the regulation, right, which is basically atmospheric in nature, and putting it into something very concrete. And what do we end up with? So the essence of decision modeling, which many of us are familiar with, is to break down these complex situations, such as the regulations, into manageable elements, match those elements with data, operators, and functions. That's the role of the OMG group, to define these requirements for DMN, all right, and then structure that into the decision model. So, and the objectives, of course, our customers, increasingly, I think 2/3 of my discussions are about compliance now. You know, if I go back a couple of years, we were talking a lot of operational improvements, you know, coming up with better order cache processes or supply chain management and so forth. A lot of, again, it could be just what Signavio is doing, but I think it's true for kind of permeating everything, right? Is that requirements for operational risk reduction and risk management with regulatory compliance, the requirements are huge, right? And you could, you know, take some viewpoint like, okay, this is a political thing and people are asking them to do unnecessary amounts of compliance, and it's not really the case at all. What a big motivation behind regulatory compliance is to just coexist in this complicated world we live in today, right? That's the objective. So we're looking at some really sticky, tricky problems, right? The other data point, if you haven't heard this data point, the top 30 plus banks in the US have a $1 billion with a B dollar budget to comply with all of the CTFC and other IRS regulations that they have. $1 billion for compliance. And some of this idea, I think is, you know, the too big to fail idea. That you're going to have to be so big that you can have $1 billion to comply and come up with compliance structure. That's the wave that we're operating. And again, what are the reasons for this? Things are becoming so complicated just to operate in our volatile financial environment. Now we have Brexit, and it's going to throw. This is going to be really good for us. Well, I mean, for the IT industry, it's more requirements. But 2008 wasn't bad for us, right? They only turned to the operational decision management and to us to try and solve these problems because we just cannot write. What is it? We can't write our way out of. Code our way out of every problem. So
instead of too big to fail, they're going to be too small to comply.
Yeah, right. Too small. Exactly. Too big to fail. Too small to comply. I can't come up with small banks like region. So again, these are the time pressures, and overcoming the hurdles of that time pressures, size of the internal. Consistency of the regulations are huge. They're not consistent, as we said, like looking at the taxonomy of actually connecting them all together in some type of structure is very difficult. They want safe agility. They want the ability to go in and make modifications to these regulations once they change. It's kind of a driving factor. By simply, we will hope to just change the model and redeploy it again. And we get down to this accountability and auditability, right? Right now, we are unable to map regulations to decision models. We just, no one has that ability yet. Now, we can make an honest faith attempt, and I'll show you kind of what we did with a few of the regulations, but it's just something that we need to structure. So, again, this group's an expert group, and they kind of, you guys know this idea, but the decision itself is an upward flowing of data, like hour to part of day in this hello world example. The sub-decision moving into the head decision deciding what message to display, right? And that input ends up into the structure of the top level decision table. But how do we do something like that? That's right. Would everyone agree? Basically, that's how the decision model it works. Basically, right? They have the input data, some logic at each of the sub decisions, and it feeds up to the top level. Basically, that's how that works. But this is the type of text that we're dealing with, right? So, part 43. All swaps are reportable, with the exception of internal swaps between affiliates that are wholly owned subsidiary of the same parent, with the exception of any covered entity, right? Covered transaction is, et cetera. So I'll show you our solution for that. All right. So, you know, again, the problem that we're trying to solve is to go from language like that to a decision table that looks like that. So, but on top of that, which isn't so bad, because if we're experienced, we can make data, we can make enumerations and so forth. On top of that, somehow we want to be able to map back to that source document, to this section, and that's a fake section, part 1A, it isn't, but they do have numbers behind that, to that section, to that paragraph, and say that this particular section complies with this line. So, and then this is part 2 again, same type of text. Single names out of scope, except for all of the SFEs, GFEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, et cetera. Indexes are out of scope except narrow body. What I found over and over again is they have exceptions, and then they have exceptions to the exception, and exceptions to those again. So we're constantly flipping back and forth. And you can't, if you take one section down here, right, you can't really understand what except narrow-based or index swaps unless you've read 3 paragraphs up, because you're having an exception to the exception. So it's flipped back onto a reportable swap. So again, real quick, why are we doing this? I mean, as the industry, remember what happened in the financial crisis. What happened in the financial crisis was when those bonds went broke, right? These swaps, these huge credit swaps that banks had among themselves started to fail. They weren't collateralized to the point where they could pay people their money. And not only that, there was no visibility. No one knew who had paper out to whom, right? And these swaps, they're huge, enormous. They're billions of, not billions, trillions of dollars, some of them. So, you know, someone like PNC Bank will give Deutsche Bank a $100 billion credit interest swap to stabilize credit transfer in dollars between PNC and them, right? Before that, no one had any idea of who had what to whom. So the objective of Dodd-Frank, right, which is supported by the banks too, they all want to see what other people have. They can go in there and see the value of that. There was some of this in Brexit, just as a side. So Brexit thought if the pound fell to some level, there was a certain risk that some of those euro pound dollar swaps would crash. So, but now because of Dodd-Frank and the other, at least we know they're there, and someone could act to do that. But during the financial crisis, it took like 8 months to stabilize that. So how do we define sub-decisions from such text? Again, I'm not, because we're experts and this is more of a thinking meeting, I'm not proposing a solution. And so how can we look at that text and break things like what is a reportable swap into sub-decisions? And how can we also make that, again, consistent with the policy? So we have this notion of the ruling document, right? But the ruling document is kind of interesting, it's there, but it doesn't really do much to solve this particular problem. So, and then breaking that down, how do we break the particular lines and segments into a business rule? So we can take this sentence now, right, and start to break it down a little bit using some common techniques or definitions of what the rules are. So that statement of the action to be taken when those particular set of conditions is true, that's kind of how James Taylor defines it. Those conditions I say, are to compare, categorize, compute, and control. Right, so constraints basically fall within this realm of comparing one number with another, categorizing a number, making, is it a reportable swap, is it a wholly owned subsidiary, computing sometime, like swaps have to be reported within 15 minutes of their posting. And then finally, business processes comply with this control. So there's another paper, and I'll have it, it's in my PDF that was done, research, which basically just said that the business decisions have 5 basic outcomes. Who does something, when do they do it, what is the next thing that needs to be done, is this data okay, right? And finally, has some event occurred? So during the context of that, looking at these requirements that were regulatory requirements, we're not just looking at rules or constraints. We're also looking at prohibition of behavior, constraints or restrictions of behavior that the organization has to report on or take action on. So, and not only take action on, there's certain levels of authority that have to occur. Certain executives have to be in place for certain types of bank actions and certain types of loans and certification. So those types of outcome are process outcomes. So we have in our regulatory documents, we have rules or decisions. We have a lot of rules, they're obvious rules. There's some not so obvious process activities, some of them are activity, but we don't have obvious decisions, right? So the decision is kind of the art, or you could use some methods like what Bruce is working on, right? To come up with a method of deciding where to place that decision. Or Larry Goldberg had some other methodology for doing that. And I don't advocate one thing or another, but just having worked with this. So in general, just looking at this one particular first requirement we talked about, all swaps are reportable with the exception of internal swaps between affiliates that are wholly owned. A wholly owned subsidiary would be like a bank, a subsidiary of a larger bank that is completely owned, right? They own 100% of the stock, right? So we can see that the covered transactions here is actually a data element from top to bottom of that particular set of reportable entities, right? And so it affects all of the rules in this particular decision table, right? And then the cross table, right, including whether it's a particular reportable entity is related again to the parent entity, the affiliate or guarantee, etc. Right, this attribute here. So all I'm saying is that there's not a strict one-for-one. I've got 4 or 5 business rules here, or 4 business rules here, but I only have 2 sentences and a number of clauses. You can't really, we have to analyze the data elements that are needed within the structure there, assign the right data type, right, and then group them to achieve the objective of that. So, and then we could do something with this compliance section to say that this is related to Part 1A and Part 1B, etc. This is the current practice that we have right now. That's what we're doing at Signavio. I imagine most people are doing something similar, where you have some comments section or annotations that would relate back to the section that you're working with in that requirement. If someone, I know that TriSoSec has a tool for gathering some requirements and mapping them into this. That looks pretty good. Again, but it's not really as much focused on trying to solve exactly what piece of or what aspect of this regulation am I complying with. So that's why I like this meeting, because I didn't really have to solve the problem. I could just point out that we've got a big problem that we need to think about. Because again, the,
Thank you very much.
what?
Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, yes.
You,
Good.
Go ahead. A decision table has inputs and an output.
Yes.
So you're deciding one thing from the others. A legislative clause specifies some sort of overall constraint amongst a number of things.
Yes.
So you
In
could,
a context.
in principle, derive a number of different types of rules from it, deciding on different aspects of cases under different circumstances.
Sure.
Here you're assuming that the purpose of that rule is to say whether it's a reportable entity or not. And are these carefully chosen because they fit with that? Are there other types of legislation which would give you several different types of table from the same rules?
Yeah, the margin reporting requirements give you formulas that you have to compute the amount of, the quantity of money that has to be set aside in order to support a particular swap. So, yeah, go ahead. Do you have a comment?
Well, I had a comment or a question in general about this.
Yeah.
It strikes me as kind of crazy for a business this big. I mean, because this affects all banks of the world, basically.
Absolutely.
For a company like Signavio to be doing this work.
No, we don't do it. We provide the software.
You provide, it seems like there are financial risk, you know,
Our partners who is doing it.
applications. It seems,
Yeah.
so it seems like,
No, we
and right now they embed that logic in Java or something. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
My son works for one of those companies.
Yeah.
And
Well,
my question
not all the
is,
banks are using
my
it.
question is,
Not all the banks are using that.
but maybe they shouldn't be yet, because my question is, why aren't those applications using decision models embedded in their, because these regulations are not only complicated, they change every 3 months.
Yes.
Or 2 months or something. So if you write it in Java, it's, you know, that's a problem. If you do it in some
But there's also
model-driven way, it's much better. So
It's a
why don't we embed decision management inside of these apps where the people are domain experts and they know this stuff? They don't have to kind of figure
But
it
that's
out.
what's happened.
It is happening?
Yeah.
So,
It depends on banks, but some do, sure.
yeah, our big consulting partner in Germany is KPMG. And they've been a Signavio user for a long time on the process side, and they're a big compliance side. So they have, a series of compliance solutions, which include decision models that are built in Signavio Decision. And so they bring this as like, all right, I've already worked on this, right? And it has the data model assigned, then they work with their IT people. So it's like a combination of services and services and a bit of, and some type of technology. But the advantage being is that we have their business analysts, not their Java coders, but a lot of them are business technical, but the business analysts are actually building these. So, question?
Yeah, going back to the process, the business processes and the integration with that, it seems a bit static. So in the decision domain, when a constraint is violated,
Yes.
is there accommodations for input to be dynamic, or is it determined beforehand based on the decision model?
Well, it'll determine the inputs being dynamic. What?
Right. So
Well,
in other words,
the
they're
inputs
either-
are pretty static. I mean, they are what they are.
Right.
The outcome or the result, the output of the decision, again, we try to make them static, but that, again, that becomes the art of how you put these together. You start to check for a compliance event, and then has the event occurred or not? Or the more complicated case that sometimes I've encountered is having the compliance event occur in the course of making that decision.
Right, but you
So
can
you
make
can
a
do-
decision in case of a non-compliance event?
Yes, absolutely.
Which comes from some non-deterministic, process that, just got triggered?
Well, I mean, it's generally, it's always driven in this framework of, did they report within the time frame that they were reporting? Or did the person who did the reporting have the proper authorization, or the proper, separation of concerns, things of that nature. So they're very, the events that we're looking for are very specific. So again, what I tell folks, again, 5 minutes, thank you, all right, bring it up, is to looking for the 4 C's, compare, compute, control. What we've done in our lecturing and training, and we trained a couple hundred people on this, is to basically, for the business analysts to look at those sentences, determine that they are a rule in the context of making a compliance decision, and try to decide what data, computations, or logical operators that they need in order to implement that rule, and then what has to happen as an outcome of the decision itself, or the rule itself. Right. So this, once they have, and that's worked fairly well. Again, talking from that viewpoint of, okay, we've identified that one particular decision is, like this is a decision, these are rules within the decision. We identify the type of data that's needed, which DMN standard provides very well. Date, enumeration, text. Establish the enumerations. We tend to use a lot of enumerations in those compliance decisions. And since I'm short on time a little bit, let me go ahead and I'll just bring up my one model example, which is part 43. I don't have a mouse over there. All right, so in part 43, we did this by inspection, right? We identified that there were 3 critical decisions. Was it a reportable entity? Was it a reportable event? Or was it the product reportable? The reportable entity would be, you don't report swaps with yourself, that type of thing, right? Events are, is it a new trade, a novation, a closeout of the trade? And then finally, a reportable product is, there's certain products that had any, basically swaps on equities, foreign exchange, interest types of swaps had to be reportable. So just look at briefly. So we have, again, we're using the authority, the data source. But again, it's not, okay, cool. It doesn't really tell you that much. It's nice that it's there. We need to have more detail, actually, and that was the point of this, than that. We need to be able to drill into what particular row or column. If I bring up that decision table, all right, this has been more or less their approach of the folks we work with, is they'll go row by row and try and list out all the parts that are associated with that. Now that'll give you an the tool gives you an impact. So, I'm looking at Dodd-Frank Part 43, Section 1A, right? And you can go into Signavio and pull up all the models that reference that. But again, this is done by hand, right? And so you're doing it with brute force. You don't have a formal way of saying that this document, all right, here, this document, sentence by sentence, has been taken care of. We only have the trust that our business analysts, the consultants, and everyone has done a good job on it. Because we don't have a way yet to map from this environmental structure here down to all of the details that need to be done. So we need to have a way of marking out stuff that doesn't apply, doesn't apply to the decision models that we're building. So I will just, again, let's flip back. I need to show you these, I've got some updates. I'll send you an update to this. You may, if you're interested in the problem, again, this was a paper that was done a number of years ago that talked about compliance decision outcome. It was a very good paper on that topic. And in terms of structuring regulatory requirements, this is, I think some of our researchers have said this is one of the best papers on it now. And as you can see, it's a high assurance technique that they're using. So it's high confidence software techniques that they're using. So if we're gonna solve this as an industry, we need to start to look at some of this. How do we mark up that entire document and make sure that we've done the requirements? So that's my presentation for today. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, did you actually run the entire big system or part of system what you implemented and validate results? How do you know that you implemented what is in the document? Repeat question.
How do I
How
know?
do you know that what you implemented
Yeah.
is actually what was in the document? I understand.
The only way we have now is by inspection and test results.
So, do you have examples of this, or just to see example of big decision table, not just two lines? How big your decision tables and how would you?
Well, that's actually close to the solution. So some of them are not all that complicated.
I just can, maybe you can tell me, we had similar problem,
Yeah.
but not such huge problem. It's company who follows the regulations about how to distribute money associated with certain patents. And there are a lot of parties and there are a lot of regulations. And they have a team of lawyers who interpret these regulations written in text and putting them in their working system. The system was in graphical interface, it was impossible to.
But then you have yet another document.
Yeah, but so when we introduced rules to this system, it allowed them to do this mapping. What was our conclusion after this experience? We still did not help them too much. And system failed because we could not validate consistency. And what the worst thing, the original regulations had errors inside, and this is unresolvable error. So conclusion is the following: people who write regulation should do this not in the natural language, but inside certain decision models. Test this, like we do have, like the Department of Insurance provides their own regulations, but they also provide test cases for them, and they actually run the system. In the future, all regulations should be automated, not natural.
There's a manual for the writers of Code of Federal Regulations, and there's a structure that they're supposed to keep up, but there's no enforcement.
But when we're talking about billions and millions,
Yeah.
next time when regulations comes, at least technology people should tell
Well, the
regulators.
technology people, the regulators go, we like that concept in principle, but we have to see that there's technology that works well enough that's accepted in the
No,
industry.
why not?
So it's a bit of a chicken and egg. You have to use the business analysts for a while,
Yeah.
and then show
To the
that
lawyer.
you could also do it directly, and what the advantage of that would be, and how that would work too. The Dutch have been doing that with tax and customs law
Yeah.
for a while. So they're kind of an existence proof of a serious.
See that little Berlin word, that's for my benefit of my American audience.
But there's a,
Yeah.
we've got this. Go back to Jakob's point. The regulations are not written as an attempt to describe how a set of decisions should be made. They are a set of constraints within which any decisions you make should be
Right.
made. So the problem is not. I'm wondering what you're actually representing when you produce your decision model. Are you saying that is an example of a set of decisions which are compliant with those regulations?
Yeah.
Or are you saying that that is a piece of reusable logic implements those regulations. That can be used by other decision making.
Both. I mean, yeah, there are parts of those decision models that we build that are based directly on parsing text straight out of the regulation itself to establish enumerations or constraints or formulas and so forth. But yeah, that.
Okay, you got it. No, sorry, that's all right. Forgive me.
Yeah, I would.
So
I'd have to
that
think about your
reportable
question.
entity, that reportable entity decision,
Yeah.
for example, you're assuming that because there's a regulation about that,
Yeah.
that is a question that needs to be asked at some point
Right.
when you're doing something else in the organisation. So you ought to be able to access that decision.
The ones I was showing were transactional, so based on the transaction data, was this a reportable requirement, and did this entity have to report it?
Okay, so you're starting from an assumption about a particular decision that needs to be
Yeah.
made and how it relates to that
So
legislation.
those, most of the Dodd-Frank regulations are like that. This set of things, with these, they're all based, a lot of them, on the 2008 financial crisis.
When you see the kind of things that SPDR was designed to handle, right, but.
I would question that.
Yeah.
Actually, I think they were only designed for validation, really.
And a
You
good
know,
AI
decision making.
Well, no, but.
That's essentially what that paper
was
is.
designed. Well, okay, yeah, whereas that's what in a formal way, these kinds of always-on rules. I'll talk to you.
Yeah, but they were designed to,
To
yes
turn
and
it
no.
into-
I mean, I've talked with Dr. Newman and John Hall and others, and it's kind of weird, but they claim that, you know, the R was sort of an afterthought. The main emphasis was modeling the vocabulary to support
Right.
this kind of stuff, as opposed to directly being the knowledge base that you would work from to do decisions when making a decision.
Maybe it's an intermediate step to
Right,
translate
yes, it's
something
an
like
intermediate
SPDR,
step.
and that gives you, your vocabulary, business description, philosophy, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
as well as some knowledge and information about the domain, and then maybe you would translate into something that's actionable.
Yeah, but you know, it's kind of interesting. I was excited, a lot of people were about kind of rules concept in SPDR, but they really only ever meant it to be like for validation checking of the vocabulary, for example. Or certain very simple kind of deontic stuff, as opposed to really decision.
A lot of these things are talking about, right? You shall or shall not do this.
Yes, it's true, there is the prohibit and permit. But it was kind of interesting because that kind of went along with the validation.
You have one, okay.
Mentality, as opposed to the decision.
It's just,
It's not really
Got a lot of
fundamental.
traction, I don't think.
A lot of traction.
Yeah.
we just part around there for another 10 minutes.
Okay.
See what it's more next time?
Just every year or two, somebody at OMG tells us we need to integrate with SPDR.
Oh, yeah.
There's something you can talk later, are you going to
Right,
do
and
your
that's
section?
usually-
Yes, I'll do.
Okay, let's try to find What's your name? It's hard to remember.
I have some, but it's.
Actually, some, I think.
Do you have a card?
I can't remember her name.
Guess so.
I guess, maybe she runs the RTF or something like that.
Here's something.
But she, you see, and we had to do the test, but not.
Here you are.
SPDR, and I said, well, we're starting our RTF.
We'll be at the
Right, but this is in Berlin last year. Great.
Yeah.
See you.
Okay. Okay. So, while we have little technical difficulties, just want to tell you, we had just presentation from real world of financial applications, and real world always a little bit different from our theory, and you need to apply human brains to each particular case. Next presentation would be devoted to also real world application, Oliver would present this for pricing optimization. How it's done? In a second. So I will let Igor talk.
That's where you need it.
I shall never hear that song. Same way again.